also in your place, how is it about the COVID situation? Is everything a little bit easier now, or things are still hard?
I missed the first half. What was still hard?
I mean, your the social life and other thing. You can go
Um,
outside.
it's a little better now. I don't. I mean, social life is not so great, but for everyone,
Yeah,
it's not great. But
I,
I've moved in with my girlfriend at the moment, so that's been going very well. There have a few people I know in the city who I see every once in a while, so I've been keeping busy. So things that I somehow haven't had too much free time.
Mhm. Yeah, I follow your Facebook page. I saw that you were roaming around somewhere, right?
Oh yeah, yes. My girlfriend is very good at taking photos, so I've been posting some of those. I think I still have a whole suite of photos from travels. I mean, I think before the pandemic, the year before, uh, I went to China twice. I went around the U.S. I went to um, uh, where is it? I went to Finland. I went to London. I I had a month where I was in 4 different countries in 4 weeks.
Okay. So you have visited the main office here of in London, the nature.
I ha I have. It's
I
nice.
have. Nice.
It's fun
Okay,
there.
I see.
Ooh,
Okay, so yeah, okay, so Adam, it's about 6 in India, so 8:30 a.m. in New York, right?
yep.
So officially very good morning to you, and first of all, thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank
So
you for
hello
having me here.
everyone. Yeah, of course. So hello everyone. Welcome to the Department of Chemistry, IIT Delhi. So it's my pleasure to welcome you in this webinar series. First of all, thank you very much for joining this webinar today. So before we start, we will have couple of minutes to tell to the participants who are going to attend. Maybe we can wait couple of minutes, at least 2 minutes. Let's see how much of maximum participant we can have, and after that we will start our talk.
Sounds good.
Yeah, great. Great. All right. All right. It's apparently looks good because we have 71 participants so far. So anyhow, welcome again, everyone. So my name is Vishwarup Chakraborty, and I am the webinar facilitator for today, and also an assistant professor at the Department of Chemistry at IIT Delhi. And we're very pleased to bring you to this content today, which is the part of our online Pratidhani series, that is the departmental webinar series that we are organizing on every Wednesday. So basically, in this Pratidhani platform, we invite each week eminent scientists from different part of the world, including India, and also different areas of chemistry. So this is basically 30 minutes talk that are going to held, and this is different from other talks because we have a broad participant, speaker who has some time limit. That's why we shifted our time from 4 to 6. Okay, so regarding the upcoming webinar series, please check our website and you will find the links and also flyers and also the emails regarding the upcoming webinar series. So basically, this webinar series is organized by Author Cafe. So Author Cafe is a platform that aids with writing, collecting, organizing, collaborating, and also publishing your research content through features and integrations with different products like Mendeley, retro, Odseed, cross-reference, and so on. So think of it like Google Docs, special design and developed for the academic community and much more. So today we are really thrilled to have Dr. Adam Weingarten from Nature Communications. He is basically located on New York office from USA, and he is our distinguished speaker today. So before we start the talk, and I request Adam, I have a couple of comments. So during the talk, please unmute yourself to have some noise, the background noise. And if you have any questions regarding this talk, please type them in the chat box and we will try to get them at the last of the talk, and then we will proceed to the speaker. Okay, so before I ask Adam, I need to give a very short introduction on him. So Dr. Adam Weingarten, he graduated from the University of Chicago in USA with a degree in chemistry, and very interesting, he also has a degree in geophysical science. Okay, and after his bachelor, he joined the Northwestern University in Professor Samuel Stubbs' group and he received his PhD degree in 2014 August. So his PhD work was based on supramolecular materials and solar physical conversion. So after having his PhD in 2015, he traveled all over the Atlantic and Mediterranean Sea to Israel and joined Professor Aya Weinstraub lab at Ben Gurion University of the Negev as a freshman postdoctoral research fellow. And he joined that department in 2014 October. So fortunately, I was also there, and also there in the participant, Professor Manoj Ravi from MIT University was also his colleague. And after 2 years in Ben Gurion University of Negev, he returned back to USA in July 2017, and he took over the position of associate editor in Nature Communications Journal at New York office. And right now he is a senior editor in the same journal. So his editorial interest is to cover photoelectrochemistry and nanomaterials and also renewable energy production. So a very warm welcome from our department and also from the organizing committee. And the stage is yours, Adam. So, okay.
Thank you so much. It's really exciting to be here, and I'm really happy to give this talk. So with that, I'll jump in and begin sharing the slides so you all can see what I'm talking about. Let's see. Oh, so just to check, everyone can see the slides?
Yes, it is visible, Adam. Yeah, perfect.
Wonderful. I want to make sure it's there, otherwise this will be a very unpleasant talk. All right, so once again, thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be able to talk about publishing in nature research journals, something I think everyone will have an interest in. So by the end of this talk, I'll hope you have a better understanding of what we as editors look for in papers that we want to publish, as well as some of the key differences between nature research journals, and my own journal, Nature Communications. Now, I won't get too in-depth in this next bit, but I'll try and provide some pointers on how to write a paper for a nature research journal, and provide some ideas as to how we reach the decisions we reach. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time today to talk about open access, but Nature Communications is one of Nature's largest open access titles, so I encourage you to look more into that. So a little bit about me. I won't spend too much time here, as Bisrope gave me the very kind introduction. I graduated from Northwestern University looking into supramolecular soft materials for solar to energy conversion, before going to Israel looking into the photochemistry of polyoxometalates, among other tasks. And then I joined Nature Communications in 2017, where I handled photochemistry, electrochemistry, water splitting, CO2 reduction, and nitrogen reduction. And I'm on the energy materials team. So this is headed by Pratik Donger, who looks into the mechanisms behind energy materials. We also have our new batteries person, Ronaldo Raccini. We have our electrochemistry expert and fuel cells expert, Rona Zhang, as well as our heterogeneous catalysis expert, Long Chen, and our expert on supercapacitors, Mo. So now, zooming back a bit, Nature. Nature was founded in 1869 and has become the world's leading global scientific journal. It publishes a full range of scientific disciplines. Its mission is to communicate the world's best and most important science to scientists across the world and to the wider community interested in science. I presume all of you have heard of Nature, unless you are very new to the field. So Nature is an enormous journal. But, and while it publishes great things, sometimes it misses. So it's published the discovery of the neutron, the structure of DNA, the demonstration of the laser, magnetic resonance imaging. But there are misses. Us editors are not perfect. We missed out on the Krebs cycle or beta decay. We apparently published Pavlov's obituary before he had actually passed. And there will likely be even more mistakes as time goes on. The journal is headed by editors, and editors are people too. So let's say, looking at Nature, what makes a Nature paper? This is what you want to know. You want to know how to get your paper into Nature. Well, report to Nature, those have the most significant and widest implications. They reach the broadest audiences. So, for example, an advance that in biology, if it's readily apparent to the chemist why this is an advance or how this changes the entire field, that is something that's worth publishing in Nature. It is directly applicable to experts and non-experts. So there's this wide-reaching implication. So it's not a specialist journal, which then raises the issue. If Nature is meant to publish the most important advances in research, what about advances that aren't quite as important? So, for example, what if there's a hugely important paper in physics, but the biologist doesn't really care or understand? Or similarly, what about an advance in genetics and it's only appealing to other geneticists? Same can be said for material science, immunology, chemistry, neuroscience. There are some advances that are extremely important, but don't quite reach the same audience that Nature really wants. Well, this is where we get to the Nature research journals. So, for the last 30, 40 years, Nature's been putting out new journals such as Nature Microbiology, Nature Plants, Nature Immunology, or in the physical sciences, Nature Materials, Physics, Nature Climate Change, Nature Energy. These are subject-specific journals, and there are new ones coming out all the time. So in 2018, there was Nature Sustainability, Nature Catalysis, and Nature Electronics. And I believe we have some new titles coming up that I can't quite preview yet. So what makes these types of Nature journals? They're highly selective. As some of you may know, an enormous number of papers are submitted to these journals, but only a small fraction are published. These publications tend to be very high impact. Furthermore, each journal is run by a team of full-time professional editors. I am not working in a lab whatsoever, and for the meanwhile, I prefer not to be. Furthermore, each journal is independent of each other journal. So a rejection at Nature Catalysis doesn't mean that you'll be rejected from Nature Energy or Nature Materials. So looking into what makes a Nature research journal, they report the most significant advances within a discipline, and they can be appreciated by non-specialists. So let's say if you are publishing the highest performing solar cell, well, that's a very obvious advance that's readily apparent to people who are not working on solar cells, although it may not be as clear to those working in biology rather than material science. So the significance of these papers in one specialty should be readily apparent to researchers in another, especially when they're in the same discipline, but that doesn't quite have the cross-discipline appeal as a Nature flagship paper. But once again, there's limited space in Nature and Nature research journals. and only the most important research with the widest implications can be published. Then, which raises the next question. What about important advances in a specialist area, but when the appeal is only to other specialists? Maybe that solar cells paper isn't quite the best performing paper in the field, but it denotes a pretty strong advance that other solar cell experts would find fascinating. Well, that brings me to my journal, Nature Communications. Nature Communications reports significant advances that have the potential to influence thinking in a field. These are often new ideas, new insights, new technologies, and the exceptional broad appeal isn't quite a prerequisite for publication. So Nature Communications' first paper was published. We're getting a little closer to the 10-year mark, but not quite there. The journal is all in a big change from the flagship and research journals. Nature Communications is fully open, is online only and fully open access. So each day, if you log into the website, you'll see that there are new papers. So we don't wait for subscriptions. We don't wait for every couple weeks or every month. We publish by the day. Our impact factor is around 12 for the 2-year mark, around 13 for the 5-year mark. Nature Communications is one of the highest impact multidisciplinary open access journals. We have offices in London, Shanghai, New York, and Berlin. And this slide actually may be out of date. We have more than 80 editors. I think we might have over 100 by this point. So in 2018, we published over 5,000 papers, and I'm pretty sure we're going to beat that mark this year in 2020, even though we're all at home. So as we publish more papers, we were able to hire more editors, get a better sense of the fields, which allows us to handle even more papers and publish more papers, which gives us access to more editors. So we currently have a virtuous growth cycle. So we're very busy. I tend to read around 500 or so new papers a year. So I tend to read about 500 new papers a year, so around 10 a week. Sorry, I'm going to continue. So now let me talk a little bit about the whole peer review process and submitting a manuscript. What happens? So I have here this Far Side comic, what it can feel like when submitting a paper, when you might feel like you have your work, then you run this gambit of fairly critical scientists. I like to think of myself as this one right here, who can put an end to things should I wish. But more seriously, how to prepare a paper for submission if you want to submit it to a nature journal? This involves a little bit of self-selection. So you look at the paper and say, where does it sit in the field? Does it represent a significant leap forward? And if you look at the paper, you look at the field, and you say, yes, this is very significant. Other people haven't found this, or this performance is unprecedented, or this insight is completely new. Yeah, submit the paper. I want to see it. Also involved in the preparation is making sure the paper reads clearly. You want the structure to be clear. You want the language to be accessible. You want to bring out the key 1 or 2 messages placed within the context of existing literature, as well as balanced citations. I also recommend to avoid overselling your work. I cannot even detail how many times I've seen claims of the best water splitting electrolyzer. I keep seeing that claim, and then I take a special satisfaction in citing all the papers that perform better. Now, if, let's say, for example, you do send me a paper and it is the best, yeah, that's not overselling your work at all. That's an accurate assessment. But if your paper, for example, is not the best, that's okay. There may be some other valuable contribution aside from having the best performance. It's not just a numbers game. I like to see good performances paired with novel practices, new ideas, and deep insight. So we have a series of policies to look into to help in manuscript preparation as well. Getting back to more writing the paper, explain, don't hype, show, don't tell. Analyze the data, explain what it means, provide conclusions that are justified. You also want to give the context. What is the problem you're trying to solve and why? So an example is oxygen reduction. Normally, people want to turn oxygen into water. Hydrogen peroxide is corrosive. It's not helpful. It's seen as a wasted product. However, in the last few years, there's been a renewed interest in turning oxygen into hydrogen peroxide. Now, all those materials that made too much hydrogen peroxide, now those are very interesting. It just depends on the context. And that's quite helpful in framing the paper. Another important piece is to focus the paper. What's the one most important thing a reader should take away from your work? It's very difficult to sift through a manuscript with 2, 5, 10 different ideas that the authors are trying to convey and all highlight. Usually there's 1 or 2 main ideas that makes it easier for the audience and the editors to understand. Then there's the significance. So what? If someone asks you why your work is important or how it changes the field, you should have an answer, and that should come through in the manuscript. And this is important in the self-screening process, that if you wish to submit a paper to a Nature research journal, that so what should have a very clear answer. If it's simply another example of another material that performs slightly better than another similar material, that work may be more for a specialized journal. But if it's an entirely new technique, or no one has seen these results before, or it'll have a bigger impact, then yes, we want to see that. Another big thing is clarity. You want the figures to speak for themselves. You want the figures to clearly convey the story you want to tell and the conclusions. You don't want to be exceptionally obvious that we have to read the paper, but someone following the figures should be able to follow the story of the manuscript as well. Now, delving a little bit more deeply into the pieces of the manuscript, there's the cover letter. So the cover letter is usually underthought of or underutilized, in my opinion. The cover letter, you can think of that as your 10 minutes in a room with the editor, where you sit them down, you say, hey, I want to submit my work. Here's what I think is important. Here are some people who are big names in the field who would be able to assess the work. Here's why I think it's important. And I recommend having short cover letters. Having 1 or 2 paragraphs is all you need to convey the main idea. I get a little sad when I see 5-page cover letters, because then I realize the authors aren't focusing the message. They're just summarizing the entire paper. I'm going to read the paper, but I look to the cover letter to see what details should I be paying attention to. In the cover letter, as I mentioned, it's great to have referee suggestions who might have insight into your work. Now, as a point of conflict of interest, don't suggest supervisors, recent or current collaborators, friends, or relatives. I do my homework. I will find the conflicts of interest, and I will not send your paper to those people. But choose people who are well known in the field. That's quite helpful. I often look to the referee suggestions when I'm stuck in finding referees. I also recommend adding some referee exclusions. Maybe there's some people you don't want to see your work. Often, if you're in close competition, or if you think that they might be a conflict of interest. I also highly recommend identifying all related papers submitted elsewhere. I tend to get quite unhappy if I see a paper that's submitted, I like it, I think it's very novel, and then I find out that a near identical paper has been submitted somewhere else. Then when I see that, I think, well, maybe this paper isn't quite as novel as I expected or had hoped. However, if you let me know, say, hey, you have another paper submitted elsewhere, I say, hey, thank you for letting me know. Now I know that there's no conflict. These are 2 separate works, and we can proceed. So I have here an example of an unhelpful cover letter. So you can likely read this for yourselves, but this is a waste of time. This is 3 lines where the author doesn't see the point of the cover letter, and I would say this is not helpful for them. They might as well have no cover letter. But then again, that's a wasted opportunity. So let me get into the editorial process. So I mentioned I read around 500 papers a year. So even though I'm reading that many papers, I'm trying to get the first decision as quickly to you all as possible. So ideally, it's within a week. Sometimes it's 7 to 8 days. I like to say we go for impact, not impact factor. So I look at the paper and see, oh, who is this relevant to? How interesting is this? How important are these results? What's new? What's exciting? What's the significance? So at least one editor reads each paper in depth, and many papers, the ones that are very multidisciplinary or very difficult, those are often discussed with other editors. So as I mentioned, I read about 500 new submissions a year, although I sometimes feel like it's more, depending on the size of the team. When looking for referees, I try and get 2 to 4 people, and I try and aim for a turnaround time of about 4 or 5 weeks. Sometimes it's much shorter when we have referees who write their reviews quickly, and sometimes, unfortunately, it takes much, much longer when a referee is late or disappears or is unable to review the work. That's when we get serious delays. And if you have a delay in your manuscript, you feel free to send the editor an email saying, hey, we haven't heard in a while. What's the status of my paper? And the editor is very happy to let you know. So I have here a little diagram of the process, the whole process. So you can send in a new paper or you can transfer from another journal. I'll discuss that more a little bit later. And then we get to our editorial decisions within the first week. So for Nature Communications, we send about 60 to 80% back to the authors. So that's usually, and the rest we send out for peer review. So I have not checked my numbers lately, but I usually aim for around a 25 to 30% rate of sending out to peer review. But I can also be quite harsh. And then once it comes back from peer review, I make a decision based on the referee reports. So either an accept, or which is rare but can happen on the first round. Most often it's a revise or a reject because the revisions would be too severe, or if there are major problems in the work, then simply a reject. Now, there are various trials that we have with peer review that we're exploring, like transparent peer review. This means that you can see, for transparent peer review, it means that you could what the reviews were at publication stage. So for several manuscripts, if you were to go onto the Nature Communications website, scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll see a peer review file. And that'll give you access to all the rounds of peer review and all the comments the referees had on that work. We also allow double-blind peer review. So maybe if you don't want your identity getting out there or the reviewers to make a judgment based on who you are, you can withhold your name from the referees. The editors will still know. It would be very challenging to withdraw the author names from the editor. We also have portable peer review. So if your work is reviewed at Nature Chemistry or Nature, and the work is not accepted there, but transferred to Nature Communications, I'll be able to see those reports and send it back to the relevant referees, or in some cases, overrule them. So more about the referees. So I choose referees who are experienced in the field. I look to make sure that they have a track record of publishing works in that topic. They're technical experts, but I also look for reviewers who have a broad overview of the current trends and important issues. We do ask our reviewers to be efficient, and normally we ask for a 10-day turnaround, but given the current global situation, we give more time. It's very difficult now. We also look for referees who have a history of thorough and to-the-point responses. I do look for new referees fairly often, and I tend to return to the referees who give nuanced reports, who are very critical, but are also supportive when they believe the work can improve, or decisive when the work has made several errors. I mainly look for referees who are fair and constructive. If there are reviewers who are overly negative, I tend not to return to them, as if I'm sending a paper out for review, I often find something interesting in the work. So then, for the decision-making process, I base my decisions based on arguments. We don't count votes, and I often disagree with the reviewers, whether they have a positive or a negative review. So one very long, highly critical review will be more important than two somewhat positive but very brief reports. Most papers have 2 rounds of review before publication, and keep in mind for borderline decisions, we try and avoid multiple rounds of review. One of our primary goals is to have papers be published quickly, and going through 3, 4, 5, 6 rounds of review is quite unreasonable to us. At that point, we will transfer to another journal. However, keep in mind that if the work is very interesting and there is enough interest, we will be patient. So for example, because of the global situation, it may take much longer to collect data for experiments. So while we request revises take up to 3 months, I'm happy to give more time. If I'm asking for a revise, it means we're interested in the work. So let's say you need another week or 2 to collect that data, or you're waiting for a reagent to come in. Let me know, and I'm happy to delay the revise deadline. I'd rather more time be spent on the revise to make it stronger than less time and have it be too rushed. Now, for dealing with referee reports, if you are invited to resubmit, please do so after you comprehensively address all the comments. I have had many cases where the authors say, yep, these reviewer comments, we don't believe them, and we're going to submit it to this anyways. If there aren't new experiments or new data, I'm not going to send it back to the referees. If they were very negative and requested data, and the authors don't provide it, well, then the decision is made to me. But if there are some experiments that are too difficult, let me know. Not everyone has access to synchrotron and radiation for all their studies, and that may delay a paper a year. Yeah, that's a very reasonable reason. That is a rational reason why the experiment wasn't done. So keep that in mind when constructing point-by-point responses. I'm looking to see that the referees would likely be satisfied, and if I don't believe they would be satisfied with the responses, I won't send it back to the referees. As I said, all revisions are seen again by the referees, so stay professional. The referees can make mistakes, just like you and me, so don't be too harsh if they've missed something. Referees are often swayed by data, explanation, discussion. So if there is an overly negative response, I also will not send it back to the referees, but I'll usually ask for a revision. Also keep in mind that peer review is a modern tool. It wasn't always this way, and there's still some issues with it. So we have here a letter from Einstein expressing his displeasure at having his paper sent out for peer review. You're not going to be able to get around peer review, but there are some possibilities to think about. Also, if you're unhappy, think about your case realistically. Papers can be seen again. You can appeal a decision if you let me know, but they are not given a high priority, and you should expect there to be delays. As I have 500 papers coming in each year, the appeals are a little bit lower on my list. So if you wish to appeal, present new data, point out possible errors that the referees made, and argue based on science. Helping detail the immediate contribution to the field is quite helpful, while being more vague is, of course, not helpful. Ways not to appeal are statements about your reputation, which I frankly don't care about, or unfair and unspecific attacks on the editors. I have feelings. I get quite sad when authors say, oh, this editor has no idea what they're doing. I do have a pretty good idea of what I'm doing. I've been at the journal for 3 years. I've been promoted to senior editor. I've seen 500 papers a year. I've seen 1,500, around 2,000 papers. I have a pretty good sense of the area. Not complete, but a decent sense. Also, don't oversell the work. I do my research. Also, cosmetic rewriting of the paper with the same data, I reject those quickly. I'm looking if you appeal a decision, provide new context, new data. Also, don't ask for a new editor. I handle photocatalytic water splitting. No one else does. It's going to come to me. And if the paper is rejected, we do have a transfer system. This is intended to save you time. We want to find the best home for your paper. So editors from one journal will talk to other Nature journals. So if your work is at Nature Chemistry and it doesn't quite make it there, maybe Gavin will consult me and say, hey, Adam, what do you think? If I find it interesting, then I'll let him know that, yes, tell the authors to submit the work to Nature Communications, and I'll send it out to review as quick as I can. So these are usually indicated by a PS. NatComs may be interested. Then transfers post-review, this is based on the referee reports. So this is where I'll discuss the reports with other editors to find the best home for it, whether it be at Nature Materials, Nature Communications, or at our communication series. And here I'd like to say, like, the papers tend to flow from Nature to the top, to the research journals below them, to Nature Communications, then down to the communication series, or scientific reports, with the journals at the top being the highest impact. But keep in mind that the journals are independent. So just because Nature Photonics thinks that Nature Communications might like the work doesn't mean that Nature Communications actually does. So it's worth trying, but don't be too it's not a guarantee. And with that, I've come to the end of my talk. So thank you all for listening, and I'll be happy to take questions.
All right. Thank you, Adam, for your insightful talk, and I hope everyone has enjoyed to learn the nature publication policies and also, of course, many different or individual information from nature communications. Now, I would like to see the comments or queries related to you, and then I raise to you.
Yeah, so Adam, I do have a
Yeah,
question for you.
yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So,
Excellent.
yeah. So, Adam, so do you encourage rebuttals? Like, for example, if a manuscript is rejected from editorial level, for example, and probably there was a misunderstanding, from the editor side. So, can we write a letter explaining our stand, or is it not encouraged in nature?
Of course, this is a misconception that I try and correct. I don't discourage appeals. I want to, if I have made a mistake, I'd love to hear a letter saying what I got wrong. And there are several cases, I think I'm even handling one now, where I provide a decision on the work, and then the author said, hey, we don't think you're correct. We think you didn't discuss this point, or you didn't see this other piece. And sometimes I look at it and say, yes, I did. I wasn't interested. Or I'll say, well, maybe I'm not sure about that aspect. Maybe it's worth sending it out to review just to get more information. Because the referees can be quite indicative of how interesting a paper is. And once again, I don't operate as the sole. People think of the editors as gatekeepers, and I am, but it's not ironclad. It's not like what I say is true or is. I have a good sense of the field, but it's also hard to tell what a paper's impact will be when it is published. So I try and I do encourage people to submit appeals if they think I've made a mistake, so that I'm happy to look over a paper again and listen to new arguments. My mind isn't always changed, but I think it's better to try than to just fully accept my word. That's not how science works. There's a back and forth. It's a conversation.
Okay, thank you, Adam.
Of course.
All right. Okay, so there I can see a couple of questions from audience. So first one is that Subhasri, and she asks that what is the effective way to read a paper and to judge its effectiveness?
So there's probably several different strategies. I like looking through the figures first and then the cover letter just to get an idea of what data are present. So, for example, if there are some types of papers I see that are very formulaic, and I see, okay, they have all the data. I say, okay, that's fine. If there's a paper that is in a topic and they are missing really crucial data, that starts to form an opinion. But otherwise, I just read through the paper. I read over the abstract, go through the introduction. I skim some parts of it, but then I read the results and discussion more carefully. The conclusions I read, but I also skim that a little bit more lightly because that's just mostly a summary of the paper. So that's the most effective way. Reading a paper more than once. So for every paper I get, I read through the paper, then I write a summary, and then I write an evaluation. So in the evaluation, that's where I dig into the literature. That's where I look into similar works. I look into past works by these authors. I look into papers that I've collected. So I look to see, are the authors citing the right papers? Are they aware of the field? And there are many cases where, let's say the authors say they have promising performances for a device, and they provide very comparable performances to other papers that have been in high impact journals that are recent or similar in material scope. I look upon those works very favorably. To me, that's the right sort of context. However, if the authors are overselling their work, they omit references that give higher performances, they don't show new works, they don't look into high tier journals, then I get the impression that the authors either aren't aware of those works, which is concerning, or they're trying to mislead me because they know that they have to get by me, which is also concerning. Although sometimes new papers come out and it's easy to miss those. So I'd say reading through the paper more than once, looking through the references, those are some of the most important pieces, especially looking through the references. I hope that helps answer the question.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I have also very similar queries related to like journals. So, does the nature journals really care about the quality of the figures or graphic that is embedded in the manuscript?
Good question. The short answer is at the publication stage, we do. Initially, the figure should be readable. I have had papers where I can't actually read the data. Like the quality or the resolution is so poor. At that point, I go, well, if I can't read the data, the referees can't read the data. So I can't verify it. Then it weakens the report. But otherwise, you don't need exceptionally high quality figures. And even if there's language, grammar mistakes, those get hammered out later on. Those are more aesthetic. So I'm much more forgiving of those. I'd rather the science be good, well reasoned, rigorous. That's the most important piece. But there is a certain point where if the figure quality is so low or the language or the writing is so poor that it's hard to understand the work or nearly impossible, then I pass. But so that's speaking for the Nature communications aspect. For Nature or the higher research journals, it is probably more important to have the figures in a very good shape because there are so many papers submitted. I mean, Nature is rejecting 95 something percent of what they get. So they don't need much of a reason to reject. So for those journals, I would highly encourage higher figure qualities, smoothed out language as best as one can, just because they're it's harder. They're what they send out is they send out such a smaller rate. But for Nature Communications, I try not to look at that stuff as much. I don't mind the occasional misspelling, and sometimes it's just funny.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so there is a very nice question from Professor Suddhasattva Basu. He asked, is it better to choose specific editor in the covering note for highlighting the innovation or only to chief editor? What could be the, sorry, I missed that point. So, yeah, what could be the size of the covering letter?
So for the cover letter, so technically it doesn't matter who the cover letter is addressed to because you won't necessarily know. So for example, if you're doing photocatalytic water splitting, it's likely me. So you could address me in the letter, but you could also just say, "Dear editor." because maybe I have too many papers for the week and someone else will be handling it, and I'll just be looking at the paper in a more advisory role. Or maybe I'm on vacation and I won't be able to read the work. So the chief editor usually doesn't read these, and as you don't know who is reading it, it doesn't matter who you address. To me, if there wasn't a dear editor at all, I wouldn't mind that at all. That doesn't help. It doesn't hurt. I don't think you can request editors to handle certain papers. Our team managers go through the manuscripts. They look over the titles, the abstracts. They'll skim the works, and they'll see whose expertise appears the most relevant. If it is a very borderline case between multiple editors, well, then multiple editors will likely see the paper before any decision is made. So, for concerning the cover letter, I mean, the cover letter is meant to help. It's not meant to hurt. So you could have just a series of bullet points saying, here's what's important, here's the right context, and that'll be quite effective as well.
Right. Great. Okay, so there are a lot of questions.
Excellent. I'll try to answer more quickly then.
Yeah, there is a question from YouTube viewer, Pratik Chatterjee. Is lengthy paper writing good or bad? Is every journal wants a concise writing?
Every journal. So once again, the question was: every journal wants concise writing.
Yeah. Is it good or bad to write a lengthy paper? So that is the main theme of the question.
That's a little subjective. I like seeing more concise papers, but the question to ask oneself is, what do we have to explain to the audience in order to convey the next result? So one of the reasons why we begin with synthesis in writing papers is that it doesn't depend on many other results. You don't have to characterize the material. You can't characterize the material or discuss the characterization without explaining how you made it. So I'd say if the synthesis, however, is completely known, then you can be more concise and say, we adopted it from reference X, or we adopted this procedure from before. If it is a new synthesis, then spending a little bit of time, maybe a paragraph, to discuss what's new or what's different, what's the advance there. So if it's a known synthesis, you don't need to spend more time on it. But for novel aspects, it is more crucial to explain those more clearly. It's a difficult balance because I like seeing more concise papers, but I really appreciate when authors do spend the time to say, here are the results of what we see. This is similar to what other people have seen in these materials, or dissimilar, or how it provides a little context for each of the results that makes a very nice story. Mm-hmm. It depends a bit. So for Nature, the works need to be far more concise. For Nature Communications, we don't have a word limit, or not a real one. So I would recommend putting in the relevant details for your story. We do allow supplementary information, and if more details need to come out of the supplementary information, then referees will usually say so, or us editors will say so. I'd rather have all the information present in the main text and supplementary information. But for the actual main text, maybe I'd say lean towards being more concise, but maybe have as a side draft a more expansive text, just in case more explanation is needed. In which case, you'll be better prepared to address the referee comments if they wish more explanation.
Right. Yeah, good to know to everyone. And there's another question regarding the review process. So which kind of peer review is more common in Nature Communications journal? Is a single blind or double blind?
Single blind is the most common. I get maybe 10 to 20%, if I could guess, double blind. It doesn't have an impact on my decision to send it out or not. I like the idea of double blind quite a bit. It doesn't make the task any more difficult, and ideally it should make the reviews more subjective. But sometimes you can tell who's writing, and maybe if you can't, I think it's okay for science. But it's mostly just a single blind. Well, it's mostly single blind with the newer piece that it may be zero blind at the end. we do give the options for the referees to reveal themselves at the end of the review process. So technically, it's not even blind peer review, should the authors and reviewers opt into it. But that's a much newer experiment.
Right. Right. Good. Okay, so there are a lot of other questions also. I've some of them due to time constraint. So, is there any bad impression to an editor if a manuscript is earlier rejected by its sister journal, as during submission it is asked to mention earlier submission? So, is it clear to you? I mean,
So,
yeah, go ahead.
so if there's a, just to rephrase, if there's a bad impression, if the paper is sent to one journal, rejected and sent to another,
Right, right,
it depends. So there are cases where I see a paper that's submitted to, so I can tell if a paper is submitted to Nature, the Nature Chemistry, the Nature Materials, the Nature Energy, the Nature Catalysis, then a Nature Sustainability before coming to Nature Communications. Then I have a slightly more negative view because to me that sounds like the authors are submitting to the highest journals they can and getting rejected. However, I have lots of cases. I actually had a case last week where a paper was rejected by a colleague at Nature Catalysis, and the colleague, without consulting me, said, if you send this to Nature Communications, they will 100% send it out. I looked at the paper and I said, yes, this paper is so exciting that I can immediately look at it and say, I want to send this out for review. My colleague knew my standards. They knew what I'd like to see, and they knew that if I looked at this paper, I would immediately send it out. Now, that's an extreme case, but often editors at one journal will consult with editors at another journal. So if James at Nature Energy says, hey, Adam, I think this work is quite interesting, but we can't publish this. Would you be interested? Most of the time I say, yeah, I'll send it out. Then James can tell the authors, look, I've consulted with Adam Weingarten, and he would be interested in sending this out at Nature Communications. So that is the clearest sign. Now, a less clear
right,
sign is if he looks at the paper and he thinks it's kind of interesting, and he says, look, consider Nature Communications. Send it there. They might like it. I look at that and I say, okay, he knows our standard pretty well. Not all the editors do, but James does. Maybe it's probably worth sending out. However, if
right,
James looks at a paper and says, look, we really recommend scientific reports, or we don't know where to send this, then I look at that and I say, oh, maybe the work's suitable for us. Maybe it's not. Maybe James didn't have enough time for it. I'll look it over and I'll raise my own judgments. So I try not to come into judging papers negatively. It's hard. It is hard sometimes when I see that it's been transferred many times, but a rejection at one journal doesn't mean the paper is not appropriate for us. I've had a number of rejections seen from Nature Chemistry where the editors requested come to us and the paper just sails through review. The reviewers love it. It goes through one or two rounds of review, gets published, and then gets dozens of citations. So
right.
yeah, it just look to the letter, and if there is a strong indicator to submit to Nature Communications or to the next journal listed, I recommend doing so.
I see. Okay, so there is a very interesting question. I think most of those who are submitting papers and publishing, they are often found in their review report. That is, sometimes reviewers ask to cite their own paper. What is your remark on it? I mean, you probably understand how to tackle it.
Yeah, I know of some people who prefer authors cite all their papers to boost their H index. Often, I look for referees who have published works, and sometimes I will find referees who have not been cited by the authors, but who the authors should have cited. So then that's then the referee saying, "Hey, these citations are not balanced. The authors have missed an important part of the field." And I have had papers where the referee said, "Yeah, the work looks good, but the authors are just unaware or are not citing really relevant people, even if it's not them." most of the time referees ask authors to cite their works so you can figure out who they are. And sadly, I have to recommend doing so, just because if I am selecting that referee, it is because I think their expertise is relevant. And if they haven't been cited and their expertise is relevant, they probably should have a citation. Usually 70, 80 citation or 80 references is usually enough to include at least one from someone maybe outside of our direct knowledge circle.
Good. Yeah, good. This is a good suggestion. Okay, there is another and obvious question that I was expecting from participants. That is it possible to waive off the publication charges from Nature Communication? Is it because it is bit expensive to publish in Nature Communication sometimes? You know, the font limitation and other different limitations to professors and basically
Yeah.
from our faculty. So,
It is possible. It is very rare. Usually a waiver has to be suggested at the very beginning of the submission process. Usually. There are some various organizations that can be looked up, I think, through the Nature website that are willing to pay these types of fees or partially subsidize some of these fees, because I recognize that the open access fee is severe, and it is an aspect that is extremely contentious, because that pays for the editor's time, it pays for our resources, it pays for all the things we do, it keeps the lights on, and it's what allows people to read all this research without having a subscription. And it
Right.
is, there are organizations to deal with this. There are waivers that go out. It is possible. I am less familiar with those, as I don't actually encounter these waivers that often.
Okay, there is, okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Hopefully it will,
Yeah.
sometime it will work for us. Okay, there is a another question, that is, what is the predicted or expected impact factor of this communications, chemistry, physics, or biology, these assistant journals? I mean, is it possible to tell?
Uh, so the idea is for them to exist between scientific reports and Nature Communications. So if Nature Communications is around 11 or 12, Scientific Reports is around 6 or 7. Ideally, the communications journals are between there. Don't believe I'm at liberty to say what the current estimations are if they are not publicly available. But what I can say is that the communications journals are between Scientific Reports and Nature Communications in the expected impact factor. It's not Nature Communications, but it's not at Scientific Reports, and it's one of those things where they're still in the early stages. So it's a really good question, and I really recommend checking out those journals. They are doing good work there. I know I know many of the editors on those journals. It's a difficult space to operate in, but the people there are doing a really good job. So, for example, Victoria on Victoria at Communications Chemistry. She was my team manager. She trained me to do my job here. She is as rigorous as you can bet, and she's great.
Right.
So yes, I hope that helps answer the question. It's
Right.
hopefully soon there will be more information on these journals, but I do recommend checking them out. They are really good, and they are publishing really good research.
Right. So there are a couple of more questions, so I'll pick some of them, not all, I hope. So is there any preference towards papers with both experiments and simulations against pure simulation paper in Nature Communication?
Oh, that's a difficult one. We do have an editor who handles purely computation. I like seeing experiment and computations combined. The most often case I see of it is where the experiments are done reasonably well and the simulations are very poorly done.
Right.
And that And I find that actually quite frustrating because one can give any conclusion one wants by appropriate simulation design when it's more helpful to simulate the actual materials, which is difficult. It's very hard to tell those surface geometries unless you have, for example, perfectly controlled particles of a certain size. Another reason why palms are so much better. But the simulations are meant to supplement the experimental in those situations, and then it's not particularly helpful, especially when the simulations are just repeating what other computational experts have already determined. However, there are cases where they are simulating new materials or new properties and providing a new understanding, or doing things that experiments can't do. Then it's really helpful. So generally, I like seeing it. I think it is overused and not well utilized. Let's say adding in the simulations. I have a very difficult time evaluating computation only works, and I'm trying to get around my own bias that experiments are better because that is not always the case. There are a number of crucially important computation only works, but it usually requires developing a better method, developing a new understanding, analyzing a set of materials in a way or molecules that can't be done experimentally or can't easily be done experimentally. So I believe I have handled a computation only work that was published when the authors evaluated 30,000 different compounds for possible CO2 photocatalysis or photoelectrocatalysis, where they were analyzing different properties where one couldn't do it experimentally. And they ended up finding 10 or so compounds that have been known that have the properties to do CO2 reduction, but have never been explored. That is exciting and computational only because it gives the experimentalists something to do, something new to try. So I say for the computation only works, it becomes very important that they provide some insight that the experimentalists haven't been able to address or can't address or can only address with the publication of that work. But most of the time, I see the computation is not well utilized. But then again, I'm not the computational editor expert, so it's quite likely that there are good works that are being submitted that I am not seeing that are computation only.
Right. Great. Yeah. Okay, so I'll move on to the last questions of this session. So, what is the basic difference in between a scientific writing language and any other literature writing? So, is there any preferences?
For scientific grants, ooh,
Yeah.
I am probably not the best to ask. I have not done much grant writing. I
No,
presume
not
with
grant. I think I couldn't make you understand. So I'll repeat my question again. So what is the basic difference in between a scientific writing language and any other literature? That means
oh,
the yeah.
uh, hmm. I think more recently they're probably, if I'm understanding the question correctly, they've become a little bit more similar. Scientific writing has traditionally been very cold, removing the researcher from the equation, written in the passive voice. When more recently, we recognize that the researchers, we are involved in the research. So the researcher should be in the active voice. It is more engaging. There should be a story to it. So I'd say that since the scientific writing has become more similar to others, but it's usually, but there is still the framing of what is the large topic that you're addressing, what is a challenge in that area or a flaw that must be addressed, have others try to address it, but what are still the gaps in fundamental knowledge or performance or understanding, and that sets up the work, why this work, what gap this work is filling. So I hope that gets it.
Yeah.
So,
So
some aspect of it.
yeah. Sorry, Adam. Can I ask one more question because I
Of
found it?
course.
Yes. Yeah.
Of course.
Okay. So the major concern about the reviewer process, like I found sometimes also many of those who are publishing quite often they found that sometimes reviewer like gives their comment in terms of lacks of novelty. So without any other reason. So
Mm.
what will be then the option for the authors I mean, do you send the papers to other reviewer at the same time to judge?
It depends. If the reviewer, so let's say there's three referees and they all say it's somewhat not novel and they don't give any more details, then we see that as a lack of reviewer interest, and that is usually a reject. However, if a reviewer says it's not novel and then provides no other information, and the other referees are able to explain why they think the work is interesting or impactful or worth publishing, then the novelty concern can be overruled. I do have papers. I think I have a paper I handled a couple of years ago that's been cited 200 something times when one of the referees was arguing very strongly with me that the work wasn't novel and was not much impact. And I realized citations aren't impact, but the work was outlining some very interesting performance advancements, and sometimes the novelty of a work is not the primary exciting advance. There are lots of materials in solar water splitting. People know about the same sets of materials. People are looking at TiO2, for example, forever. But you can find new understanding in it, or maybe there's some new performance, or there's something deeply insightful. Let's say if you were to take a technique that had never been used to characterize this material, and you did a very in-depth study on how, let's say, the charge carrier dynamics or into some fundamental properties. Well, technically, I mean, I guess that would be a novelty point. Novelty isn't everything. It is a soft term. So if a reviewer says, "Oh, I don't think it's novel," we don't immediately reject it. But if they say it's not novel, here are other works that are essentially the same or highly similar, then that lends more strength to that argument. So the better the evidence to the reviewer's claim of poor novelty, the more convincing it is. Just like the better the author's explanation of what makes the work novel, with the literature context, strengthens the novelty claims. Although there is the side issue of it's always possible to define a work as novel. So you can always add more descriptions and terms to make it the first ever of X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F. And at some point, the advance it may be novel, but it may be very narrow. So it's possible to be novel, but just because it's novel doesn't mean it's significant.
Right. Right.
So So I recommend we can overrule referees even if they bring up novelty concerns, but we need to keep in mind that if there are many novelty concerns that keep coming up, that is that is a suggestion that the work may be more appropriate at a different journal.
Right. Right. Okay. Great. I think yeah, we have all the questions we have attended.
Well, thank you
Okay.
again for having me.
Yeah. So first of all, I'd really like to thank you for.
Uh, can I
Yeah.
ask one question, Mr. Luke?
Yes, of course.
Okay, Adam, yeah, it's very nice talk. Thank you very much for the insight. Actually, I am just very a broader sense. What do you think these open access journals, where do they stand? Yeah, whenever you are comparing with a like something which is not paid, do you lose quality papers? What do you think? What is your input? Like if you sometimes maybe if you think about scientific report, so even if its impact factor is around 5 or 6, some people still doubt their it's not worth sending paper in scientific report. So what
Right.
about what is your suggestion? What do you think?
I think open access is in a difficult spot at the moment when there are these society journals that are paid for by subscriptions, conceptually, I think open access is a good future direction in that it makes one's research more accessible. So you can imagine if there aren't paywalls, well, then there is no limit to papers that you can access and cite. So your citation potential is much higher than papers that are trapped behind paywalls for various society journals. The difficulty is that because of that price difference, I have had a large number of people when I visit labs say, yes, we like the journal, we think it's good, but that price tag is too high, especially when there are journals that are much cheaper that have similar impact. And so I think I wish there was more support for that open access fee. I think that would change the type of citations, the publications we get. And I think it would increase the manuscript quality overall when people are not worried about the price. And this relates to Plan S, which I haven't spoken about, where there's an effort from the European countries to push most, if not all, the journals they can to open access. So then it becomes everything gets quite expensive. But if everything is equally expensive, then it balances the type of manuscripts going from one place to another. But I think you've touched on a really difficult and interesting topic that is honestly uncertain. So far, Nature Communications is making it work. We do clearly see a lot of high impact papers, even with that pretty hefty price tag. And we're still expanding even with that price tag and publishing good research. So I think it is possible, but we are still in the experimental phase of open access. If that all makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so before I close, Professor Soumik Siddhant has a couple of queries and questions, and he will conclude this session. So over to you, Soumik.
Yeah, so no more questions. Actually, I think Adam has answered a lot of questions already. And thank you, Adam, for joining us today and for the very insightful talk and also extensive Q&A session. I think this is really, really helpful for all the students and as well as faculty members and the overall research community who tuned in, and also a lot of people joined us on YouTube and they were watching live. Thank you once again for your time, and hopefully we will be able to host you physically here in the future.
I'd love to. Oh, the world is crazy right now, but I hope to visit. Thank you again for having me. This is an exciting opportunity, and if you can actually, if people have more questions, if you want to compile the list, send it to me. I can try and answer them too. I mean, I saw some questions that I thought I'd still be able to answer, but yeah, I can still compile some questions and I'll send a response.
Sure. And if we get any questions, we can then forward them to you too. Thank you again. And before we conclude this session, I would just like to thank our head of the department, Professor Anil Elias, and Professor Ram Ramaswamy, our mentor, for all their help and guidance in organizing this webinar series. And also thanks to Professor Viswarup and Professor Janaki Ram, who were the workforce and who did all the work in the background to make this event successful. And just a small announcement that next week, at 4 p.m. Indian time, our next speaker is Professor Subi George from JNCSR Bangalore. So the link to join the webinar will be available on our website, and students are requested to register and to avail for special certificates. So we will provide certificates to students who attend at least 10 talks of this series in a year. So we hope to see you all soon, and wish you a great evening. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, so Adam, so we are expecting you by next year when the situations will be good.
Hopefully
we can cook some food for you.
Oh yes, I need spicier things here than New York has to offer.
Yeah, and Manoj is also nearby, so we can have a